Scandalous extravagance are two words that we could use to describe what we hear in the scriptures today. Scandalous extravagance that would scandalize both people on the right of the church and people on the left of the church. Equal opportunity scandalization, we could say. Because in the first reading from the book of the prophet Isaiah, we hear the scandalous patience of God, who does not come in to beat people and to whack heretics. We don't hear that. We hear instead that a bruised reed he does not break, and a smoldering wick he shall not quench. That's the patience of God, who when he sees our faults, our weaknesses, and our failings, he does not come in to destroy. If you see on social media these days, if anybody is on it, you can see sometimes folks who consider themselves to be pious, spiritual, and traditional, and they'll be quoting things, I don't know if it's a true quote of St. Pius X, but things that say, modernists should be beat with fists. Well, even if it was St. Pius X who said it, it's not the teaching of Jesus Christ to be violent toward another person. Scandalous extravagance, Jesus comes as a patient one. Yes, he debated with the Pharisees, but he never punched them. Yes, he made a whip of cords and drove out the money changers, but they knew it wasn't the same thing as doing violence, because then they turned around and asked him what sign he could show them, because the Pharisees knew that somebody was going to come along and do this anyway. Scandalous extravagance. Folks on the left would be scandalized that Jesus allows something that cost basically $30,000 to be wasted on his feet instead of sold and given to the poor. There's so many people who will say things like, well, why this waste, etc.? Why does the Vatican have what it has? Why the gold? Why the extravagance? And yet, they don't lift a finger themselves to help the poor either. At least those folks who are critical. And they never say this to Buddhist monasteries, to Hindu temples, to tell them that they should sell their treasures and give it to the poor. It's only to the Catholic Church. But I am digressing. Scandalous extravagance. Mary is extravagant in her love. She's basically pouring it completely and totally out. Everything. Everything. There's nothing that says I'm completely and totally committed than what she did. And she was willing to have people misunderstand her. Because let's face it, to dry his feet with her hair was a very sensual act. It's a little risque. If she was a religious, she'd have letters written about her to her superior and to the bishop. Well, it's true. Amen. And Jesus has no problem with it. We as Franciscans, we can sometimes, of course, fall into two camps. There's those, of course, who read some of the later writings of people about St. Francis who said that he would say, okay, if there's no money for the poor, you strip the altar of the Blessed Virgin, sell the stuff from the altar, and give that to the poor. Whether that's from Francis or not, I'm not sure, but I do know that he instructed his friars to take with them gold ciborium. That's in his writings. In order that if they find the Blessed Sacrament reposed in an ill fashion, that they are to take care of the Blessed Sacrament. Extravagant waste. Will we allow ourselves to first and foremost be convinced by this extravagant and scandalous extravagance of God? He comes to the disciples and washes their feet. That's a scandalous extravagance. But even more so today, here at this Mass, he doesn't wash our feet. He comes to us in his body, blood, soul, and divinity. Scandalous extravagance. God gives us himself. Imagine somebody coming to you and giving you a check for $40,000 just because. Many of us would be cautious. We'd be careful, right? I remember years ago when I first entered postulancy. This was my first. One of my classmates was looking to go to Medjugorje, and he invited me to come, and he was going to pay for my trip. And as soon as he mentioned that he was going to pay for my trip, I began to think ill of him. It's very interesting. I look back and I'm like, what was wrong with me? One, I was afraid that he was going to give such an extravagant gift and then manipulate me. And second, I didn't think I was good enough to receive such a gift. If we're honest, we have the same fears. When it comes to God, we think that God is going to give himself to us and then guilt trip us to give ourselves back to God. That's not God. He doesn't guilt us to give ourselves back to him. It is his very gift, his free gift of love, that stirs us to love him back. It's almost natural. When somebody freely loves you, you notice how free it is, and you immediately freely love them back. That's Jesus. That's who he is. But we want to ask ourselves whether we allow the Lord to give himself completely, or whether we dismiss ourselves because when we look at ourselves, we see our faults and our failings, and therefore we don't think ourselves good enough to receive such a gift as Jesus. Well, the answer is we're not good enough, but that doesn't matter. He still wants to give himself to us. We didn't earn it. And so the question is, can we put our own sense of how we have to earn it, or our own sense of fear that the Lord is going to manipulate us, can we put that aside so that we can receive the scandalous extravagance of the gift of God today in the Eucharist? It's a scandalous extravagance. It's not costly nard. It's way more precious, this gift. Jesus in his body, blood, soul, and divinity. To ransom a slave, us, God the Father gives his Son. That scandalous extravagance that we'll hear sung in a few nights at the Easter Vigil. We want to make sure that we encounter that love, because it is that love which will transform us and help us to then give extravagantly back to Jesus. St. Francis, of course, is known to have written that prayer that says, or that admonishment that says, give everything back, hold nothing back of yourself for yourself, so that he who did not hold anything in giving himself may receive you fully. May that be our prayer today.